Hey y'all, and welcome back to another Photoshop tutorial. I am Jane Corley with Pic Visions, Media Arts and Photography. Make sure to tune in every Monday when we go over Photoshop tips, techniques, workflow, and all else post-production in Photoshop. Make sure to like this video if you do learn something new, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you can be notified every time a new video is uploaded every week. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about blending modes or blend modes. I've heard them called both things. All I know is that they're amazing, and if you're not using Photoshop blending modes yet, get on it because they're a game changer. So there are 29 blending modes, including all of the ones that are incorporated into the tools. The main ones we will be working with are these seen here in these 6 categories, divided by bars, 6 categories, and the ones associated with the brush tool. So these 6 categories are: you have a normal category, you have a darkening category, a lightening category, a contrast manipulation category, inversion, and then component category blending mode. Each of these categories do similar things to each other within the categories, and they do opposite things. Like the darken is the opposite of the lighten, multiply is opposite of screen, and so on. So we'll walk through a few of them, some of the most commonly used ones, so we can get the hang of blending modes. So a brief description of what is a blending mode. A blending mode is when you have 1 layer, 2 layers. Gotta have 2 layers. That is the golden rule of blending modes. Have to have 2 layers for it all to come together. You have a background layer or a base layer. Then you have a layer that is going to react to the base layer. So we'll call it a blend layer. It's going to blend with the base layer. You smush both of those 2 layers together and voila, you have a result layer. Base and blend layers react with one another based on their luminance of the blend layer. So we're talking light and dark, black and white, and grays, most importantly. Think of more than 50% gray and less than 50% gray. That's why we have this gradient here. Think of black all the way to white, and in the middle you have 50% gray. Let's start with normal blend mode. Normal blend mode, as we can see here, is it's a solid gradient. Your blending modes will have much different reactions with your base layers based on opacity and fill. So your normal blend layer will just make it a lower opacity. You go to dissolve at 50%, you now have static noise, graining, if you will, and that can come in handy if you're trying to sharpen, if you're trying to add some textures. Just there's so many uses for all of these blending modes. Just get creative. Get creative. And when paired with a mask, woo buddy, can you work your magic? So let's move on to the darkening section. Darkening, the way I think about it, and I hope this helps you guys, the way I think about it, the darkening section helps you in too light of situations, or when you have too many highlights and you want to darken, you use the darkening portion. And vice versa with the lighting. If your photo is too dark, then you would use the lightening section of the blending modes to make the adjustments to your colors. Darken, as you see, your gradient is black over here, and it's going to fix the blown out or less than 50% gray and make the adjustments on that portion of the image. Since this gradient layer with a darkening blending mode, the darken is going to help where it's too light, meaning it's going to give these delightful shadows and make adjustments to areas that are too light. The darkening blend mode is reflected by the luminance value in each of the RGB channels, and it selects a base or a blend color based on which one is darker. Multiply is one of the most popular used. This multiplies the luminosity of the base color by the blend color. This is great for producing richer shadows in your image. Next is color burn. Color burn is going to give a darker result than multiply by creating more contrast between the base and the blend colors. This gives more saturated midtones and reduces highlights. This is used interchangeably with the dodge and the burn tool to darken the image or parts of the image when paired with a mask. Let's move on to linear burn. Linear burn is going to decrease the brightness of the original or base color based on the value of the blend color. This mode is darker than multiply but less saturated than color burn. It's going to provide more contrast in the darker tones. Adjust your opacity, adjust your fill, get it exactly how you want it. Let's move on to darker color, the last in our Darken section. It's going to be similar to the Darken mode, but it does not bend the pixels. It compares the base and the blend colors and keeps the darkest of the two. This mode looks at the entire RGB channel, not the individual channels, the entire RGB channel. Let's move on to the Lighten Blending modes, and see it all in reverse. Lighten is going to do the opposite of Darken. Lighten mode looks at the base and the blend colors and chooses between which is the lighter of the two. It's all about luminosity, y'all. All about luminosity. Greater than 50% gray or less than 50% gray. Closer to black or closer to white. With the no change adjustment found right in the middle. No change adjustment. Let's move on to screen. Screen, like multiply, second down and second down, are the two most commonly used, where screen is the most popular in the lighten section. The resulting color will increase in brightness, while the darker pixels will have no adjustment. This is a great mode to increase the highlights in an image. Paired with a mask, change your opacity just to get the look that you really want. Let's move on to color dodge. Color dodge gives you a brighter effect than screen mode by decreasing the clarity between the base and the blend colors, improving the saturation of the midtones. The not quite dark shadows down here, but these midtones right in between the highlights and the shadows. Color dodge gives a brighter effect than screen mode by decreasing the clarity between the blend and the base colors, improving the saturation of the midtones, and increasing the degree of the highlights. It's going to be similar to the effect when you use the burn tool too heavily. See how this is all like fried and blown out? So just adjust your opacity or even your fill to make that adjustment. Let's move on to linear dodge. Linear dodge, opposite of linear burn. This is going to produce even more of a strong effect than the color dodge and screen modes. Let's pop this up to 100 so we can see exactly what we're working with. This mode looks at the color channels individually. The blacks and the shadows of the image, the base image, will have no change, whereas the highlights are affected. Move down to lighter color, opposite of darker color. This is similar to lighten mode as it does not bend the pixels to change, but it does compare the base and the blend layers and selects the brighter of the two within all of the channels. So let's move on to the contrast manipulation blending modes. This section is a mixture between the lighten and darken fields of the blending modes. These modes are going to create contrast additions to the image by comparing the light and dark colors offered. The 50% gray, greater or less than 50% gray. Overlay is technically a combination between multiply and screen modes, except the base layer, the layer being adjusted, is always the statement layer. So you're going to maintain the outlines, the information within this layer primarily. Let's take a look at the opacity to kind of explain this. The opacity is at 100%, but it's not a gradient. It's an overlay. The primary information in the photo is still the background copy. Look at overlay versus normal. Normal is giving you a solid field gradient, but if you are overlaying the gradient over the background or base image, the base image is still the primary information. The overlay mode takes the adjustment being made and applies the adjustment at half strength on colors that are greater than gray. That's why it is an overlay. It doesn't come out at 100% gray or black. It comes out at 50% gray. One large difference in this mode from other contrast manipulation blending modes is the overlay makes calculations based on the brightness of the base layer. Soft light is similar to the overlay mode, but this mode applies either a darkening or a lightening effect depending on the base layer's brightness values. But it is a much smaller adjustment and effect than overlay, as soft light avoids the harsh contrast elements that sometimes come with overlay mode. Let's move on to hard light. Hard light inversely to the soft light and overlay, hard light mode uses the blend layer to determine the brightness. Hard light comes out a little more intense than overlay and soft light. So use the opacity and the fill layer adjustment to get the intensity just right. Next is vivid light. Let's bump these back up to 100 so we can see what we're doing. As you can see, vivid light is a more intense version of the first two contrast manipulation blending modes. Anything greater than 50% gray is darkened, and anything less than 50% gray is lightened. Adjusting the opacity of the blend layer is key, because 100% opacity is not, unless that's the look that you're wanting, it's not really usable when you're doing your traditional manipulations in Photoshop. So in some areas it can be really nice and paired with a mask, so you can pick and choose what areas that this layer or blend mode is affecting. Really is really great. So let's take a look at linear light. This is going to be a combination of linear dodge and linear burn. Now you may be seeing with these ones here, like, why would I use these, Jane? These are ridiculous. Don't use them. Some of them are just because you can have the ability to make something look like that if you want to. You can also adjust your opacity and your fill to not be that intense. So don't discount it just because it looks strange. There's a use for all of these blending modes, and some post-production artists love the weird stuff. I'm one of them sometimes. Sometimes I like playing with it. And when you pair it with a mask, golly, the choices and the things that you can do in post-production are endless. So back to linear light. Linear light is a combination of linear dodge and linear burn, making the adjustment on the lighter and darker pixels. Use the opacity and the flow sliders generously to get the look that you want, as linear light blending mode can be really aggressive. Next is pin light. Pin light focuses on the highlights and the shadows while eliminating all of the midtones. This is pretty extreme mode to implement on an adjustment because it makes intense adjustments to the lighten and the darken in the image. This is a pretty extreme mode to implement on an adjustment because it makes intense adjustments to lighten and darken the image where highlights and shadows would appear. Finally, in this section is hard mix. This is kind of a cool one, y'all. This one's kind of a cool one. Let me zoom out just a little bit. It blends the RGB channel of the base layer into the RGB channel of the blend layer. The hard mix mode eliminates a lot of detail by subtracting any colors outside of the black, white, and primary colors, including red, so you can see a little bit here in the tree, green, blue, cyan, yellow, so RGB and CMYK channels. Everything else that is not absolute red, absolute green, and so on is eliminated from the image. So it just includes primary colors. Let's move on to the inversion blending modes. Inversion is, just think invert. So what was once light is now dark, what was once dark is now light. It looks at the variation between both blend and base layers to create the final result. So starting off with difference. Difference, white inverts the colors of the base layer, similar to the Control I command. So let's do normal and Control or Command I to invert. As such. Next is exclusion. Exclusion is similar to difference, where blending with the white inverts the base color values and black produces no change. As you can see, this is the black section of our gradient, produces no change. As you can see where light is making those changes, or less than 50% gray is making those changes. Moving on to subtract. Subtracts. That's kind of how to look at it. Subtracts pixel brightness values, darkening the image in areas that are less than 50% gray, and black has no effect, and only as the pixel brightness increases that the subtract mode creates this darkening effect on the image. And this is a great result. You can give the look of like a night sky if that's something that you're wanting to do, and the tonalities in the water, and let's adjust the opacity a little bit. It gives almost a dusk sort of look, and pop a warming filter on there and you've got yourself a ready-made sunset. Next is going to be divide. Divide is the opposite of subtract. The pure whites have no change, and the darks and shadows gain a brighter pixel value. So let's move on to the component blending modes. To show you the adjustments in the component blending modes, I'm going to select a rainbow gradient. And I'm going to put it on this blank layer I've created right here, just so we have the gradient, but we have it in color, because I want you to be able to see what we're working with. So, coming down to the component blending layers, you have hue, which is going to preserve the luminosity and saturation of the base layer down here, while taking the adjustment layer, the rainbow gradient we made, using those pixels, the hue of those pixels, and reflecting them back onto the base layer. You can probably notice a trend. Saturation, it's going to take the hue and luminosity of the base layer while reflecting the saturation of the blend layer onto the base layer. Next is going to be color. Color is going to preserve the luminosity of a base layer while adding the hue and saturation of the blend layer. This one is a great option for post-production artists who colorize photo restorations. Overlay is also a really great option, but color is also a very popular one to colorize images or to change colors of an image. Finally, our last blend mode on our layers panel is going to be luminosity. Luminosity is going to preserve the hue and saturation while making adjustments to the luminosity of the blend layer. This one is key to use your slider panel. It almost gives like a shine, a little bit of, I don't want to say a 3D effect, but it gives a different lighting situation. This is really great to use if you are adding luminosity to a portrait. If you want to change the lighting of a portrait or give a different direction for lighting in a portrait, luminosity is a really great one to use because it gives you that almost a shimmer, light from the heavens above sort of thing. So you can always add different lighting situations to portraits that you've already shot, or just change things up with the highlights and the shadows on anything else you're working on, any other Photoshop projects. Now, these blending modes over here, they are great to use not only on fill layers as we've done here, but you can also use them for adjustment layers. Let's plant an adjustment, maybe a levels adjustment. Why not? let's just do a curves adjustment. That one you'll be able to kind of see a little bit better. So that is too bright, and say it's all blown out, too bright. We can use a darken blending mode to make the correction. So we're going to move on to the brush now. I'm going to create a new layer so we can see what we're working with. And it's behind and clear. Those are the two additional blending modes located on the brush tool. I'm going to say behind, but just, you know, buckle your seatbelt because we've got to do a few things beforehand. Normal, make your mark. Doesn't really matter what it is, just make your mark. Then we're going to go behind, and I'll switch to my white brush. This mark will make a mark behind the mark that you just made, like so. And I'm sure you can imagine what clear means. It's pretty much the eraser tool if you have it on a separate layer. Clear is going to clear. As I said, similar to the eraser tool if you just have it on its own layer. The clear is going to clear the mark that you made. Like so. So a quick tip if you stayed to the end of the episode, if you would like to navigate through your blending modes without having to come to the drop down bar, you can hold your shift key and navigate with the arrows on your arrow pad up and down, and it makes it a lot easier to navigate through the list, especially if you're deciding between darkening blend modes or lightening blend modes, or you're wanting to play with the saturation versus the hue all the way down in the component blending modes. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you learned something new. Do leave in the comments below your favorite blending mode to use and how you use it to create amazing Photoshop projects. I look forward to seeing you guys in our next week video when we talked about blending options. Blending options, they're amazing, just like blending modes in Adobe Photoshop. If you haven't done so already, please check out my Photography Friday tutorials happening every Friday, where we talk about the basics to advanced methods of photography and how to set up your craft as a photographer, as well as some tips on how to become your own media business owner. It's very exciting, so y'all make sure to tune in, like, subscribe, share, ring the bell, you know the drill. And until next time, I'm Jane Corley with Pic Visions. See you later, guys.